Are there any limits to vision, and how good can it really be?
It's thought that the best vision a human can have is about 20/10. But remember that there are animals that have great vision, and it's not just vision that you're seeing an object, like seeing this, it's also motion. Because there are sensors in your eye that don't just detect the wall or a line, but they detect movement. You know, you can be looking straight ahead, and then all of a sudden you see something out of the corner of your eye that's moving. That's because they're motion sensors. So things like eagles, when they say eagle vision, eagle eye vision, they can at, heights of hundreds of feet can spot prey, hundreds of feet away on the ground. How do they? Because the motion detectors. They don't necessarily see the outline, but they have motion detectors in their eyes that seem some little change of movement they can detect. So there are different types of vision.
What factors would cause someone's vision to lessen over time?
I think that there are many, many factors, and how you want to cut this off is up to you. But there are many, many factors that can cause vision to lessen, and it really depends on anywhere in the eye. Anywhere from cloudiness in the cornea, the front part. As we get older, people develop cataracts, which is a cloudiness of the lens. They can have problems with the retina, the nerves. So there are many different disease states that can lessen vision.
When does one's vision reach the level of legally blind?
So a legal blind is considered vision either 2200 or worse, or your peripheral vision is no greater than 20 degrees from the center. So what is 2200 or what is 2400? And that's what I was getting back to. 20/20, which we'll consider normal vision, the easiest way is to relate. So someone who has 2400 vision would mean that if you were standing 400 feet away from something and you had normal vision, you could see it. They'd have to be standing 20 feet away. That's how much poorer their vision is. So if you can stand 400 feet away and see something on a wall and decipher it, they'd have to move to 20 feet away just to see that. So someone who's 2200 vision is considered legally blind.
What would cause someone to reach this level?
Again, many, many choices. There's the I mentioned earlier in childhood amblyopia, where the part of the brain doesn't develop. There are cataracts. I mean, most commonly, and the kind of things we see and that occur in the world today are like cataracts, where the lens becomes cloudy over time. It's like kind of putting soap on the window, and you just can't see through it. There are retinal damages, retinal detachment that can occur that can cause poor vision.
What does it mean to be colorblind?
Colorblind is the inability to distinguish different colors. And there are a few different types, but the most common type is in the what we call the red-green area. In the retina, which is back here, are two types of receptors that process or gather the light, the rods and cones. And the cones are for fine vision and the color vision. There are three colors. There's a red cone and a green cone and a blue cone, and they can process that color. And in people who are colorblind, there's a problem in processing in that area. The most common is red-green. There's blue, and there's people who don't have any. And the interesting thing for that is, so that means, how can they get to, when they're driving the car, and they can't differentiate red and green, how do they know when they look at the traffic light when they're supposed to go or not go? They know that because all traffic lights have red at the top and green at the bottom. If it were the other way around, they would have no idea. So because they can't necessarily distinguish, to them it may look, the red and the green may look gray. But it's set up in formality such that they know when the top light is lit, it's red, and the bottom light is green.
Is there anything that could cause someone who perceives something one way to perceive the same thing a different way?
Again, now, so here's where we get into, I think, a little more interesting area, and when you get into perception. And I think this is where we start to deal with more of the brain. Because the eye, remember, is just acting like the camera. It's just transmitting the signals. So and again, the best way to look at this is to look at brain integration and different examples of people who have problems. And there are some very interesting problems that people get because of the processing centers in their brain. The signal gets sent to the back. It then has to go throughout the brain. You have to be able to look at a wall and say, that's a wall. And that is involved in part of your brain. So there are people who have diseases that cause these problems. So there are different disorders that highlight this concept of perception. Well, the first one I'll mention is something called visual object agnosia. It's the inability to name something by looking at it. Even though you spend your whole life looking at, let's say, a bicycle, and you see it, and you know what it is, and you can't name it. And what happens to these patients, maybe from a stroke or a tumor or a trauma, the part of the brain, not that sees, but that helps process what you see with your verbal stimuli or your verbal integration, all of a sudden, they look at a bicycle. What do they say? They don't say bicycle. They say it's a pole with 2 circles connected on it. Or they look at a cigar and they say it's a cylindrical. However, if you let them touch it, okay, or if they smell the cigar, which uses a different sense, they can name it. But the connection between the eye part of the brain and the visual and the vocal part is gone, and they can't name it. And you see it. There's something called 2 other disorders I found interesting called hemispheric neglect. This is someone who's had damage to a certain side of the brain, and remember the brain signals cross for different sides of the body. And what happens is, it's not that they can't see, let's say, the left side of their world, because there are disorders that cause that, but they neglect it. If you study them and you test them, they can see it, but for some reason they avoid it. So they end up, after this stroke or after this tumor to this area, they end up going to shave, and they don't shave one side of their face. They totally neglect it. Or they eat food on a plate, they only eat food that's on half of the plate. And when you tell them that it's there, and they then go look at it, they recognize it, and they'll eat it. But when they're in normal vision, they won't. In a normal scenario, they won't. Again, it's not part. The eye is fine. It's the processing signal parts in the brain. And the last one that's easy is something called prosopagnosia, which is a person who's lost the ability to look at someone's face and recognize it. And so you can put a picture of their mother down, and they can't recognize it. They don't know who it is. But if you then show them their clothes, or you let them watch them walk, they can name them. Again, these are things that we don't really understand why, but we know these are signal or perception problems in the brain that don't process the material right.
How is what we see associated with sounds, emotions, etc.?
Again, I think, to answer something like this, again, it's perceptions. I think that if you look at something, let's say, like art, some people find some colors soothing. Some people find some colors alarming. Red is always considered an alarming color. For me, if there's a painter, like a person like Rothko, I find his art very interesting. I find it very soothing. Whether it's the colors, certain pastel colors. So somehow, again, your brain processes something that either soothes them or calms them or alarms them based on how they perceive it.
Do you believe that one's vision can affect the development of their opinions or perspectives?
I think it can. I was making some notes. Let me see what I had mentioned on that, because that's actually interesting. We were talking about sounds and emotions. We didn't discuss things like hallucinations. Hallucinations, again, is seeing something without any external stimuli. Drugs can cause that, or psychotic episodes can cause that. So you might actually see. There are people who said they were looking at the TV and they saw the person talking to them, and they actually visually in their mind see it, but it's not really happening, and that's what we call, let's say, a hallucination. And so there are emotional stages which can affect our ability to perceive, for sure. The last one, is that what it is?
Yeah. Well, there have been rumors going around that mothers have eyes in the back of their heads. Any comments?
Yeah, I thought about this one. Yeah, first of all, the answer is there definitely is. Don't mess with mom, because they see everything. But I'd be honestly, when I was thinking about that, there's actually a gland in the eye called not in the eye, pardon me. It's a gland in the center of the brain called the pineal gland. It's shaped like a pine cone. And we're really never really sure what it does, but it's right smack in the middle of the brain. And it's actually called, in some terms, it's called the third eye. And in non-mammalian vertebrates, they actually have cells inside that gland that are similar to the retina cells in our eyes. So they don't know if it acted as a different type of eye at some point in time during evolution. But I'm thinking, maybe moms, have an extra sensory pineal gland that no one knows about.